Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 17th, 2023. Today I'm going to take a look at the unfolding developments around the ongoing Middle East war, the implications, the potential for some kind of solution to it, and I might add a little bit of reflection on Blinken in the bunker. So let's start with the call from the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who issued a proposal yesterday in a call to Blinken for a major international peace conference that would include the major powers in the world to discuss resolving the situation around a two-state solution. He's coordinating this with Brazil, directly with President Lula, and the aim is to build a consensus to carry through the resolutions from the United Nations from many, many years ago, but resolutions that were adopted by all the principal parties in the Middle East for a two-state solution with security guarantees and economic guarantees for both sides. And the idea is to build a consensus for this and to prevent a larger war. Now, meanwhile, the larger war is definitely on the books or in the process. The U.S. already has one carrier strike group in the area, the USS Gerald Ford, and will be deploying a second carrier strike group, the USS Dwight Eisenhower, to the Eastern Mediterranean. And the argument for this is that it serves as a deterrent for a broader war. Obviously, the U.S. is preparing, if necessary, for a war with Iran, which seems to be what the war hawks are trying to provoke. Now, the deployment of these two carrier groups is quite ominous, and Ray McGovern, the veteran peace activist, former CIA operative for 27 years, co-founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, Ray tweeted out yesterday, quote, "Into the valley of death sailed the 10,000, aboard aircraft carriers Ford and Eisenhower, sitting ducks for swarming drones and other weapons. Perhaps Blinken, Nuland, and Austin want that," he asks, "or are they just dumb?" Unquote. That's Ray's tweet. Helga Zepp-LaRouche of the Schiller Institute has issued a call for support for the Chinese-Brazilian proposal. And what she added to it is the importance of bringing the global South into the discussion, not just a big power deal. Because with the exception of Russia and China, most of the so-called big powers, mainly the US and the NATO countries, are backing Netanyahu for the war. And the important question here is the implications of this for all of mankind, not just for the Palestinians and the Israelis. Just as the war in Ukraine has implications far beyond Ukraine in terms of food, in terms of economic disruption, and so on, and not to mention the danger of a larger war becoming a possible nuclear war. So what Helga has proposed is to incorporate the interests of the global South countries as typified by the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other groups, so that there can be a broad discussion of a peace process. Now, while this is going on, there's the beginning today of the third International Belt and Road Forum. The Belt and Road International Forum for International Cooperation is its title, opening in Beijing. This is the 10th anniversary of the call from Xi Jinping in 2013 to turn what we had called the Silk Road into the Belt and Road Initiative. There are going to be 140 nations participating in the conference, 200 officials at the ministerial level. So this is something that's quite big, and it's part of a broad-based motion for a new development architecture that's both aimed at providing the capability for the global South to achieve or actually do a leapfrog to modern economic technology and science, but also a reaction against the weaponization of the dollar system by creating an alternative. Now, to get back to the war situation, which, by the way, is not coincidentally occurring as this motion is taking place. As I pointed out in the Saturday discussion with the Manhattan Project, the idea of an intelligence failure leading to a war has happened before, many times before, including in 2001 on 9/11. But in particular, in 1973, the intelligence failure that led to the Yom Kippur War, where Israel took 23 days to defeat the Arab nations that invaded. And the aftermath was the Arab oil embargo, the creation of the petrodollar system by Henry Kissinger by laundering the increased income to the Arab countries into the Western banking system to be used as part of an expansion of the dollarization system and a consolidation of the floating exchange rate system. So there's a precedent for the idea of wars orienting toward a new economic policy. And with the opposition to the Great Reset, perhaps the global oligarchs believed that a war might break down the resistance to their intent. In any case, in this context, Putin yesterday placed calls to a number of leaders in the region, including Egypt and Israel, and expressed his concerns about a larger war. And he reiterated Russia's support for a two-state solution. Meanwhile, Zelensky, always looking for an opportunity to push for more funds to Ukraine, was planning a trip to Israel, but it was canceled. And it was canceled supposedly because of security concerns. Well, what's going on is that Zelensky and his chief lieutenants are worried that attention is shifting away from Ukraine, given the problems Ukraine is having in the war, the failure of the counteroffensive, and so on. And so he's calling for connecting the fight in Ukraine to Israel. And this is somewhat, I shouldn't say somewhat, this is largely related to the funding problems in the US Congress now that Ukraine has, with a growing opposition to funding the war. So he's trying to use the popularity among congressmen, almost all of whom are committed to backing Netanyahu in this war, connecting the funding for Israel and Ukraine. So Zelensky called for solidarity with Israel and called explicitly for Congress to link financial and military aid to Ukraine to aid for Israel. The Ukrainian finance minister talked about the declining popular support for the war in Ukraine with elections coming up, and he said, this is causing problems for Ukraine. He said, quote, I see a lot of tiredness and a lot of weakness among our partners, unquote. And he said it's been difficult to secure the promises for aid. Well, the White House yesterday promised $2 billion package for Ukraine and Israel. So the war hawks are linking this together to continue the war. Now, additionally, the U.S. today announced, according to the Wall Street Journal, there'll be 2,000 U.S. troops sent to the Middle East for advisory and medical support. So the possibility of the U.S. being involved in a war there is growing. Now, yesterday, Blinken and Netanyahu had a 7-hour meeting that at one point had to be moved to a bunker, a bomb shelter, because of some incoming missiles fired by Hamas. This is Blinken's second trip to Israel in a week. Again, he pledged full support for Netanyahu's call to wipe out Hamas. Now, Blinken supposedly then talked about the humanitarian crisis afflicting Palestinian civilians. But when he was asked about it, he said, quote, Hamas doesn't care if Palestinians suffer, unquote. So he's essentially saying that, well, the war may cause suffering, but it should be blamed on Hamas. Now, the question then comes up, why is Biden going to Israel today? Because they want pictures of him with his aviator glasses hunkered down in a bunker with Netanyahu? The announced purpose of the trip is that Biden will push a plan, which he said was discussed yesterday by Blinken and Netanyahu, to enable humanitarian aid for civilians displaced from northern Gaza to reach them. But meanwhile, the border crossing with Egypt in the south was bombed yesterday. The border crossing at Rafah, which is the one escape valve, was bombed yesterday by Israel, and shelters are already overflowing in southern Gaza. So with the border closed, where are the Palestinians supposed to go? Now, excuse me if I'm a little bit skeptical about Blinken's commitment to humanitarian aid. Remember the statement of his mentor, Madeleine Albright, when asked about the 500,000 Iraqi children who were the victims, who died as a result of the sanctions against Iraq. She said it was worth it to enable the removal of Saddam Hussein. Now, Blinken, remember when he was asked about aid to Syria, lifting the Caesar sanctions against Syria when the earthquakes hit, he essentially said, we are concerned with the children. That's why we have to press to get rid of Assad. So in other words, he was blaming the Syrian people, including Syrian children, for the resistance of the people of Syria to the regime change that Blinken and the United States was supporting. So when you look at these scripted events, Blinken in the bunker, Biden going to Israel, keep in mind that the reality is that the U.S. government, not the American people, but the U.S. government is totally allied with the United Kingdom's government in pushing NATO as well to join a support for genocidal warfare to protect a collapsing unipolar world order. I'm going to have links in the description section to the work going on of the International Peace Coalition that Helga Zepp-LaRouche has created, as well as, again, in case you didn't see it yesterday, a link to the discussion from the Manhattan Project on Saturday of what's behind the present war in the Middle East. And with that, I'll sign off and I'll see you again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.